On this episode of the Futures in Digital Learning podcast, we bring you a conversation with Dr. Caleb Simmons.
It's a transformative experience, and part of it is, the physical travel, but a lot of it is just being able to see the world anew, and virtual reality can allow that, that portion of it. And so I think that there's, this nice ability to be able to introduce people to new things, a new world.
Dr. Stephan.
Swap out your kind of standard, maybe like Panopto style lecture, right? Where you're kind of in the box in the corner and you got your PowerPoint slides up there. For something that feels a little bit more active, a little bit more engaged and more immersive.
And Aviva Doery.
Even just having that ability to point at something and walk up to it, right? Instead of just adding a text box on a static picture adds a lot to the experience.
About the 7 Wonders, a virtual study abroad project they are researching. Join us as we discuss the possibilities of virtual reality, of engaging course videos, and the value of accessible study abroad experiences. Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 2 of the Futures in Digital Learning podcast. We are excited to be joining you here today. Once again, my name is Davi, Instructional Design Manager with UCAT, and I'm here with my co-host, Brian Hale. Hey, Brian.
Hey, everybody. How y'all doing?
Excellent. And we are here today to talk about the 7 Wonders virtual study abroad program that some folks here at the U of A are working on. And we've got all 3 of them here today. We've got Dr. Caleb Simmons, Executive Director of Online Education, Dr. Stephan, Associate Professor of Practice for the Department of Religious Studies and Classics, and Aviva Doery, Administrative Manager with Online Distance and Continuing Education. And welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, awesome. So first, let me just hear, what is this project and what inspired it? And what have you all done so far to make virtual study abroad start to happen?
I think this is Aviva.
Sure, I can kind of jump in here. So we come out of the pandemic, and I was doing a lot of reading of audiobooks on my drive down the office, and I started driving again, and ended up reading Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. And was wow, this is so cool. What if this was real? And so kind of started daydreaming about being able to utilize virtual reality technology, bringing it to online students, because I'm working for Online Distance and Continuing Ed. Still am, great place to work. And kind of figuring out, I had a wonderful study abroad experience in my undergrad. I was very privileged to do so, but how do we sort of bring those globalized experiences to our online student population who don't necessarily have the time or the finances to be able to do that? And so I tapped on Rob and I said, hey, I've got this crazy idea. Is this something you'd be interested in? And I was lucky enough, he gave me the time of day and hopped on board. And so we essentially started building out an idea of what sort of taking his existing study abroad course that happens in Greece would look like if we brought it into a virtual reality world. So I was really lucky to also have the ear of the Vice Provost of Online Distance and Continuing Education. And then Caleb joined the online team and provided some awesome support there as well. And we were able to get some seed funding. And so we've essentially started the content creation portion of the program. And so Rob's done a lot of work on the academic side, and I'll kind of let him talk about that. And Caleb's done a lot of work on the advocacy side and kind of keeping us rolling along. But we've done 2 trips to Greece, in which we essentially just been recording and creating as much virtual reality content as possible, coming back, starting the editing process, and sort of thinking through the different ways that from an instructional design standpoint and a pedagogical standpoint, how to make these 7 weeks of coursework, right? Each week is a different wonder or a different archaeological site in Greece, make them exciting, entertaining, and accessible to students. So that's kind of the very umbrella, broad overview of the project.
Okay. Very cool. So, okay, so you have filmed stuff in Greece, and then it comes back to the students via D2L, and how do they experience this? How does it kind of transport them to either modern day or ancient Greece?
Yeah, so that's going to be the plan. Is to run this as a kind of asynchronous online course.
Okay.
And what we're essentially doing is trying to swap out your kind of standard maybe like panopto style lecture, right? Where you're kind of in the box in the corner and you got your PowerPoint slides up there. For something that feels a little bit more active, a little bit more engaged and more immersive. And so we shot the thing using one of these 360 cameras on site at a bunch of the different archaeological sites in Greece. And so that's what we were doing out in December was kind of going around to all the different sites that I went to when I ran the thing in person, I think 5 years ago now, and trying to set the thing up to kind of mimic that sort of experience. And it was interesting in the sense that, like, you know, some of the stuff works really, really smoothly in the sense that, like, you know, you get to talk about the architecture and the history and the archaeology and the iconography and all that stuff. But it also kind of presents a series of challenges that you don't necessarily have in person, right? Like in person, you get a lot more back and forth and conversation, and you know, you repeat yourself and you stumble over your words, and it doesn't matter, right? Like that's how normal people sound.
Yeah.
And then, like, when you're just speaking into the camera in front of these things, every little word I would botch, right? Like I'd be like, all right, Aviva, we got to start it from the beginning. And so
I think the longest iteration we had, you did one that took like 10 takes, and by the end of it I was just letting the camera roll because you just kept going and going, but for the most part they were like 2 or 3 takes and we were good to go.
Yeah. But yeah, that was kind of the process. And so then students will be able to basically interact with this in several different ways, right? Like kind of different levels of immersion. Because it's shot in 360, right? You could use a full 360 headset, something like an Oculus Quest, and experience the whole thing in there. And as you move around, you're going to be able to look at different parts of the archaeological site, the landscape, that sort of thing. You know, for students who maybe want to spend a little bit less on the headset front, you can get a similar-ish kind of experience using kind of the plastic or cardboard headsets in your smartphone. And then students who get nauseous or you know, don't like either of those options, you can still watch the thing on your standard laptop or desktop computer and drag around as I'm lecturing. So it really gives a lot of flexibility to the student as well to kind of engage in the way that they find most effective for themselves.
And Adam, I think your question really gets us to, you know, another part, and it's like a little bit more broad for online education. And that is like, what parts of the class are like essential that transcend modality versus those that we can lean into particular modalities and enhance. So like the idea of, like, you know, replicating a study abroad is like an interesting question to say, like, all right, what is essential for the study abroad and what can be replicated in online? And then what are some tools you can use when it's in virtual reality and online that you couldn't have access in person? I mean, one of them, of course, is that you don't have to fly and, you know, burn gas and take time away from jobs and family. So like that's an additive experience. But there's other things that can, you know, you can't pause Rob in real life. He's going to keep going. But here you can pause, go to the restroom. So like there's some power in that modality. And that's the question that we have to ask all the time when thinking about an online learning experience is like, what is it that is essential to the learning objectives? And because you know, if you try to replicate something in person, like it's going to be a bad online class, but like linking into the modality. And I think that's been a fun part of the experience is the theoretical thought behind it. Like, what is a virtual pedagogy?
Yeah, that's cool. And I mean, I think it's a great opportunity for students to experience these sites and these places when not everybody does have access to it, right? And experience it in different ways. Like I said, I think the 360 aspect of it is really cool. I've been trying to get my hands on a 360 camera just, for funsies for a while. So, maybe I'll have to bend your ears a little bit and let me take it out for a spin. But but so what, I guess the next question is, how do you, part of a study abroad, right, is the being immersed in the culture too, and experiencing that. And so in what ways does this help get the students immersed in that culture, virtually?
I think this is our biggest challenge.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think it's something Caleb and Rob can talk about a little bit more, because they did the second trip, and specifically we're looking at culturally immersive experiences. So I'll let them talk a little bit about that, but I just want to touch on the idea of presence. Going off of what Caleb's talking about, like the theoretical foundations, right? Meyer and McCransky and digital multimedia learning theories, pedagogical theories, and essentially the research that we read leading up to the creation and the development of the project was essentially the more that you can increase the sense of presence, the more students will learn, the better the learning outcomes will be. And how do you do that when they aren't actually able to interact with the cultural immersion, right? They're not there asking the questions. And so that was definitely a challenge that I don't know we have perfect answer to yet, but I'll kind of let Rob and Caleb jump in with the current solution that we got.
Yeah, I totally agree that this is like a new and interesting kind of fun part to it that is a little bit outside of my specialty as an archaeologist for ancient Greece and Rome. And so yeah, we were thinking how do you replicate the feeling of being there? In addition to, the historical information of the sites, right? Like that was kind of straightforward. You can go around to the sites. I knew which monuments I wanted to talk about. You'd hit a site, you'd do 8 different monuments and you'd be on to the next one. But yeah, what we tried to do was sit down and think through what are the types of things we would be doing if we did have a group of a dozen students here in person, and then trying to capture that experience digitally and virtually. And then we're in the process now of trying to put it together. And so some of those things are things that you'd be doing in the modern world, but have some connection to antiquity as well. So it'd be something like we went to see a potter and vase painter who still paints in kind of the traditional ancient Greek sort of way. And, we just stayed there for 4 hours and recorded 4 hours worth of video of him, throwing the pot, painting it, describing how he went about doing it, what the iconography was, how his technique overlaps with what was going on in the ancient world and how it differs from that. And then we're in the process now of trying to figure out, how do we take 4 hours of video and then condense it down to something that somebody can actually digest in whatever it is, 5 or 10 minutes. Where they still get a sense of being there and feeling like a part of it, but I don't think anybody's staying in a headset for 4 hours. So that's another one. Caleb, you can talk about some of the other things we were doing there too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question is I can get to the essence of what we need to convey to call it a virtual reality. And honestly, we did a lot of hand wringing over this. Is it just a 360 course with lecture material? And so we did a lot of discussions about if we had to boil down study abroad, what is it? And of course you can go certain directions and say it's like a total sensory immersion, that you're smelling, you're hearing, you're seeing all this constantly, and that is certainly one critical part of it, and part that leads to different learning outcomes. But then you think of what are the additive things about it? And I think what Rob was getting at, and what our conversations with that is really the thing that we're missing is the people. Because really it's that interaction with someone else. And when we think of interaction, typically it's 2 ways, but in some ways some of these experiences get at that awkwardness that is so important within any sort of relationship. So I think that's something we were able to get, and something I hope comes across is it's often Rob or myself interacting, but it's still pretty awkward. So you get that uncomfortable place, which is where, learning happens.
So there seems to clearly be a market for it, right? You turn on the TV and you can watch travel shows from around the world. You can watch historical documentaries of people tromping around archaeological sites. People want to engage in this sort of thing. Just for fun, right? Like not even for the class. And so the question is how do we kind of replicate that?
So I'm going to throw something out there, and you all can roll your eyes or tell me to, shut up and whatnot. But have you talked or thought at all about bringing AI into this? And, maybe even, and I don't know how this works. This could be, not even possible, but having some sort of like AI based avatar guide, outside of yourselves that students can ask questions to and interact with, and have it so it wouldn't just, fall on the professor, whether it's either of you two or you three at one point kind of needing to respond, and they can get some sort of like real-time interaction.
I mean, Adam, if you want to program something for us, we'll take you up on it.
All right, if it means I get to like travel to the sites and be there with you all, then sign me up.
That would be a dream.
A little bit of perhaps a spoiler, but at Arizona Online we use a third-party vendor that works specifically in AI. It's Juji, Juji Incorporated, and so we're working with them right now to integrate a chatbot into our recruitment site. But the founder of Juji, who was one of the lead engineers on IBM's Watson before she started her own company, has actually asked us to pilot a few in a few courses basically what she's calling an AI TA, which is very similar to like a Conmigo type thing, where it's a course specific tutor that's embedded. And when asked for people to partner with, luckily I was able to send her over to Rob. So this is going to be one of the places where we start to pilot this idea, because I think you're right. Like interaction is important, and to be able to have some sort of interaction in this will be additive. I mean, if we could get to the place where it was voice recognized, I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah.
But, right now they would have to disengage from the 360 and enter it into chat. But I think this is all stuff that's going to be on the horizon for really delivering more of that immersive experience.
And I think we have some tools to kind of start leaning towards what that might look like. For example, there's this really awesome technology called ThingLink, which essentially, I see nodding heads. It's a great technology where you can essentially create a 3D environment and then interact with it. And so when Rob and I were in some of the museums, we were taking 360 photos, so that hopefully someday students will be able to virtually walk through these museums. And I know that in ThingLink, they also have avatars, but they're all pre-programmed. So they just say what, you have programmed them to already say. So I think there's like an idea of what that could look like. But a few years down the line, I could definitely see that being part of it.
So some ideas I'm having hearing all of this right now. Years ago, I had to travel to India. And before I went there, I was like, all right, I'm going to immerse myself in the culture before I get there. I am not eating McDonald's when I go to India. I'm going to find a restaurant in town, go there and talk to the people there and say, I'm going to be in India for 3 months, 6 months, whatever. Tell me some of the foods I'm going to encounter. Have you thought about advising your students? Go listen to Module 3, go to a Greek restaurant, order some Greek food, and then listen to Module 3 or whatever. Go download Duolingo on your phone and take the first 2 lessons of Duolingo in Greek to learn some of the language that you're going to be encountering. Are you using your phone to kind of supplement what you're doing?
Man, we're thinking we got big dreams and aspirations. Because one thing that I would like to do, and I mean, it all depends on budget, is actually kind of like a lab kit where we went to a beekeeping thing, like to actually have some honey from Greece, pot, or have like some small piece of pottery, because again, it's like gets to like the tactile side, the taste, the smells, being able to have all that, maybe like a thumb drive with some Greek music. Like, I think you're right. Like the experience is a holistic one, but at this point, starting with the things that we find the core and then building out. But I like where you're heading, that, this is something that really it's a lot more than just listening to a lecture. And I think that's where we've all been kind of ruminating, and Aviva has been doing like, the hardcore research behind this, think about like, what it means to be in that space and truly immersed, and where's that line.
When you got there, I'm sure you had a plan here in the US. We're going to film this with this people. When you got there, did you ever have to look at that plan and go, that's just not going to work? We've got to punt and go with something different. Tell us about that.
I'll say a little, like maybe a little bit, but the thing worked pretty darn smooth in terms of how it all worked, right? So props to Aviva on this. She put in the there's essentially one kind of form that you need to fill out to get access to be able to film at the different archaeological sites in Greece. And then the central kind of archaeological authority emails out to the specific sites. And so we'd show up, right? And the person at the little kiosk would look at this paperwork and look like they had no idea that we were going to be there, and went very skeptical. And then they'd go make some phone calls, and to a T, everyone came back in about 10-15 minutes and said, like, go right ahead. And so that I honestly thought that worked out pretty smooth. And the biggest thing I found in terms of the recording was, like, again, I thought I would just get to the sites, and having been there a bunch and led a bunch of tours, like, I thought I would just, talk normally and do my thing. And it would like start out okay, and then I wouldn't know when to end what I was talking about. And then I would just start rambling on. And the next thing you know, my like 2-minute spiel was like 4.5 minutes. And the last half of it is just totally off topic. And so moving on from there, I realized, like, I got to map this out in a more detailed kind of way. So, like, Aviva would be driving from Athens to Delphi, and I would be like in the passenger seat taking notes about exactly what I wanted to say for each monument. And then we'd get there, we'd film the following morning, we'd drive to the next place, I'd be taking notes in the passenger seat. But it worked. It was a smoother process than I anticipated it to be, with the permits and the filming. It worked well.
And did you get to involve any of the curators at these sites, like interview them for extra special hidden secret tips that nobody knows, or those little gems that you only pick up from the folks that do this day in and day out, things like that?
So it's not something we had the opportunity to do on this trip, but the kind of goal is to kind of layer these things in over time, right? So like the core of it will be like, we've got the archaeological sites, we've got those filmed. They're going to be relatively easy to edit down because I've been doing a bunch of like two-minute segments at each monument or whatever. But then we're going to try to layer that stuff in as we continue to go back. We'll have to set those things up specifically ahead of time to get somebody who speaks English. And, oftentimes the head of whatever the museum or site isn't actually going to be there on a daily basis. So you gotta set up a special meeting for that sort of thing. But I think it'd be super cool because they're going to know things about the sites and the history of the site and kind of the modern history, since it's become a tourist attraction that even me as like an archaeologist doesn't know off the top of my head. So I look forward to integrating that sort of thing.
Nice. It's good to hear that, because I think a lot of instructors might look at something like this as a very daunting project, and it is. But to be able to hear, it was a little easier in some aspects than we thought because you were so prepared, I think that is a positive selling point,
Yeah.
And I do want to definitely outline that, like, Rob was a total guinea pig in this process. We went with no idea whether or not it was actually going to work. I was driving to the airport when I got the approval from the Greek Ministry of Sport and Culture that we could actually go and film. We really love waiting till the last minute. So, we essentially were like, let's set the bar low. Let's just see what we can do. Let's see what we can get out of it. Luckily, by the end of the trip, both of us were like, so happy it worked. And then, of course, there's this like long list of just dreams of like, okay, the next time we'll do this, and the next time we'll do this. And so I think, thanks to Rob, the next time we start approaching faculty, we can say, look, we've already sort of started to iron out this process, right? Like, we know that standing 5 feet from the camera is a good thing to do, because if you're standing too close, it's a really jarring thing in the headset. We know that, like, if you walk into a frame or you are physically pointing at things, right? There's different design techniques that we sort of learned. And it's interesting, if you watch the when we post it, you can go and see it. But if you watch the lectures in order, you can see Rob just getting more and more comfortable, and us sort of figuring out the different aspects of things. I will also say that we got lucky because it was a very, like, there was nobody at these archaeological sites. This was the low season. There were very few tourists. The only time we really had a lot of people around was in Athens. And so we really had a lot of flexibility to kind of move around, place the camera in different places. So we did have that flexibility to just see what would work. And so now we sort of have that foundation. We can have these dreams of what comes next.
So
Wonderful.
you're misleading the students to think that these sites are empty all the time when they go, right? Is that?
Yeah, it was actually
Yeah.
pretty cool. I've actually never been there in December, right? Like, I have a field project in Greece, but it runs over the summer. The study abroad program I've done before was over the summer. And man, it is awesome to be there, like, and at a site like Delphi, which is a huge touristy site, right? Like, you go during July and it's just tour bus after tour bus, and it's still a cool site, but, like, you know, you're wading through people on your way up to the Temple of Apollo, and here it was like, I don't know, we saw maybe half a dozen people in the.
I think we saw more dogs than we did people at Delphi.
It was cool. Like,
That's cool.
If anybody's just planning their trip to Greece, December is a sweet time to do it.
Good to know. Good to know. I'll mark that down. So my next question kind of goes now to, like, the technical aspect of it. And so now you have these videos, like, where are you putting them? How are you putting them out there for students to see? You know, you mentioned, you know, being able to use the VR glasses and things like that. And then, like, what types of interactions within these videos are there, and, you know, what can students do with it, and what kind of programs are you using?
Yeah, so all the editing is happening in Adobe Premiere Pro.
Okay.
Really awesome tool. I'm learning a lot as I go. We're hoping, the idea is to have them all on YouTube. Rob actually has his own YouTube channel that has a lot of the lectures, so students can access them in the headsets. That was another challenge we had to think through, right? Like, students having to type in the entire title. So how are we going to truncate these titles so that that specific video pops up, right? Right now, there's no interaction in the videos. That's sort of the next step, is thinking through ThingLink, right? And how we can sort of introduce that interactivity in the museum space. I will say that there are some existing resources out there. For example, Delphi did have its own virtual reality tour of its museum. The big challenge being it's all in Greek. So if we have students that can read Greek, great. I'm going to make an assumption that a majority of them don't read Greek. But even, like, the major archaeological museum in Athens has a virtual reality walkthrough, right? And so it's also figuring out what already exists that we can tap into, that students can be more interactive with. But I know Caleb has a dream of doing a lot of 3D scanning in the future, so students can actually move artifacts around and interact with them.
Yeah, that would be cool. I could see, like, a lot of cool things, you know, being able to, like, touch some interactions, have another, like, you know, almost like you're inside of one of the old VH1 pop-up videos. You get the little bubbles that pop up. I don't even know if this is possible. I'm just throwing ideas out there for you. You take them and leave them.
Well, you know,
I think
it's actually pretty surprising how, like, low bar of entry there is for, you know, 3D scans. And so, like, you know, you have an iPad, especially one that's updated recently, and it's got LiDAR in it. And so you can actually make a super high quality, high definition 3D scan in 360 that you can upload to, you know, a variety of websites, and then people can play with it, annotate it, do all kinds of stuff, and, you know, dive into detail that you can never get actually with like your own naked eye in the museum, because they'll let the iPad get real close. So it's, you know, so I think there's a lot of possibilities with tech. Just, you know, part of it is capacity, because you know, look around at the people on the project, and we've all got day jobs. And this is something in addition to that's cool and a neat initiative, but ultimately, like, it takes a lot of time, and Aviva and Rob have been very generous with their time on this project.
Well, they keep flying me out to Greece, so
yeah,
it's an even trade here, you know.
Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with it. Drag it out as long as you can, Rob.
Yeah,
Like,
I'll
right?
play around on Adobe Premiere.
Yeah.
Start scouting locations for our Greek campus.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, okay, so what's beyond, I guess, you know, and maybe you haven't thought about this, but thinking about like what you're trying to do, like what beyond just study abroad, what kind of impacts or benefits could this possibly have for just, you know, online learning in general, across the board?
I mean,
Hale?
yeah, this really, I mean, when you think about what online learning can do for accessibility for higher education, like there's, you know, and accessibility in the broadest terms, that people who like just really can't make it to campus, it's an amazing resource, and then it actually gets exponentially multiplied with the people who can't make it to study abroad for
Right.
you know, all sorts of reasons. You look at the demographics, and you know, it's a pretty monochromatic group that goes on study abroad, and then also it's pretty monolithic in
Yeah.
its socioeconomic background because it's expensive. Like if you
Yeah.
have to work, you can't go.
Yeah.
If you have a family, you can't go. Like, you know, there's all these barriers, and you know, those of us who've either gone on study abroad or led them, it's a transformative experience, and part of it is, you know, the physical travel, but a lot of it is just being able to see the world anew, and
Yeah.
virtual reality can allow that, you know, that portion of it. And so I think that there's, you know, this nice ability to be able to introduce people to new things, a new world, without requiring the very high bar of entry, which is you gotta like have no restrictions, be completely free, and have thousands of dollars in the bank, right?
Right.
So if you don't have all those, you can't go. With this, as long as you can register for a class, then you're good to go.
Yeah, and if you think about cost of entry, right? Like study abroad is what, close to $10,000 on average right now, and the cost of a headset, cheap ones, you can get one for $250, and you know, we're also really trying to get a centralized store of headsets on campus so that students don't even have to pay for the headset, right? They can loan it out from the library. So
Cool.
we're even thinking past like, how do we've already created something that's more accessible, but we're not fully there yet. How do we keep breaking down those barriers to just provide more and more access to these students?
Yeah.
Well,
Very
I love Caleb's idea of the kit, the sensory kit
Yeah.
that gets sent out. You know, but how cool is that? Here's stuff from far away on our planet, and I'm getting to touch pottery and incense and all this other kind of stuff. That's just, it's a phenomenal thing. You know, especially it would have been phenomenal during the pandemic when everything was shut down. You know, to have those things just shipped out to you, and you get to experience them, and you know, maybe for a small fee you get to buy that sensory kit. You don't have to send it back or something.
So I'm curious if you have done or are planning to do like any student interviews or collect student data as part of the project to see like kind of, you know, where their heads are at, and you know what they're thinking, and how you can incorporate any of that into kind of the future plans as well.
Yeah, a whole dissertation's worth actually.
Yeah. All right.
This whole project actually started because I'm a PhD student in the Center for the Study of Higher Education,
Okay.
and yeah, I was just really interested in learning about how students are learning in these spaces. You know, what are they looking at? What are they talking about in their assignments? You know, what pieces are sticking out to them? So we're going to be doing a pretty incorporative, all-encompassing study, hopefully on the first pilot of the program. You know, there'll be like pre and post questionnaires and one-on-ones with students, and then we'll also be able to get some information from like a weekly reflection journal, right? Which is again something that Rob had students do while he was there, and so bringing it into the online space not only is recreating that same feeling that you would get if you were actually on study abroad, but is also providing us with some data that we can look at.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm super excited to survey the students as well, and in a more formal kind of way than just asking in class, but going through the whole IRB process and getting that data and being able to crunch the numbers. And I think it's really exciting just because like I personally I just have no idea like kind of how students are going to respond, right? I think it sounds really cool. And virtual reality has kind of been slowly making its way into slightly more mainstream type things, but it hasn't taken over everything yet, right? Like, and so I'm interested to see whether like we come out of it and students are like, wow, that was like the coolest thing ever, or whether they're like, hey, that is cool, but I'm watching it on my computer screen just because it's easier, or like some sort of mix between it. Like it's just one of those things where I legitimately don't know what the answer is going to be, and I'm excited to find out.
Well, I think one of the interesting things, and one of the positives, is that for this project, you have Rob doing the talking because he's an animated personality. Because if you want to sink the ship, put a walking Ambien pill in front of the Coliseum. People are going to tune that out. But if you've got somebody that's excited and engaged and you can hear and see that they want to transfer this information to their students. That is a big, you can forgive a lot of stuff if you've got an excited, animated personality bringing that to you. So bad audio, bad video, whatever, if you've got that great personality sharing stuff, that's a big, big win.
We get to go study some of the coolest things in the world, right? And if I can't get excited about it, why should the students be excited about it?
And the nice thing is it really does come across in the videos themselves, right? I was recently going through, and you go through every single video you took, take 1, take 2, take 5, right? And even when Rob gets frustrated, he's like, all right, we'll just start over. It's going to be okay. So it's like hard to be like, it's naturally engaging. And so I brought a rough draft of one of our like sizzle reels to the vice provost who gave us the seed money, and he was like, wow, you picked the right guy. And I was like, yeah, I know.
What's interesting about it? Oh, go ahead, Rob.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that, and actually, it comes across more in the virtual reality than even in the regular 2D like studio. Because I think many of us on this call have seen Rob's lectures, and if you haven't and you're just listening in, go to his YouTube and watch some of them, and you see it there. But whenever you can actually get him in space, you can actually see really it is more dynamic, and in this way, like it's part of the virtual experience is you actually get to interact with someone from head to toe instead of from navel to head, right? And there's actually that movement in space winds up being something that really conveys a lot of information about the landscape, about how things are directed in space and oriented toward one another. So that animation that Rob brings comes across actually like more holistically for the learning experience in the virtual modality,
which is also backed up by research, right? Like one of the studies I read recently pretty much looked at virtual worlds and said, okay, we're going to put a text box on something we want students to look at in one iteration, and we're going to have the instructor in the video point at this thing that we want students to focus on. And the students who were involved in the pointing in the interactive video retained the information much more than just the text. So even just having that ability to point at something and like walk up to it, right? Like instead of just adding a text box on a static picture adds a lot to the experience.
It's good to know. Let me just take some notes and inform all my instructors to point at things in their lecture videos from now on.
I'm going to bring it up though. We got to do the equity for the folks who can't get those things, that is one of, I think, the hardest things to take into consideration when you're designing something like this. You're doing all of this visual work. How do we translate that into an equitable experience for the folks who have visual difficulty? And, you can do that with descriptive audio. You can incorporating some kind of screen reader software that explains. I just found out recently about the descriptive audio when watching the latest Star Wars series on TV, they describe things that you don't even see on screen, but that the writers have put in the script or whatnot. And once you hear it, you look at the screen and you kind of go, oh, yeah, okay, that was there and I just missed it. Okay, now I'm going to have to watch all these episodes all over again.
No, you bring up a good point, Brian, because this is something that I've thought about a lot too. Because as I talk about accessibility, like that's a big part of this is like, a lot of the sites that Rob and Aviva and myself went to, like if you were in a wheelchair, they're not accessible. But, at the same time, we are leaning into a modality that is, heavily, sort of ableist for people who don't have any visual impairments. So it is, when you're solving one thing, you wind up like creating another. And so like it is something that we are going to have to tackle, because that's the goal, is to make higher education accessible for everybody. And so how do we do that in this space? And maybe it's with not only having descriptive audio but also spatial audio, which is something that we started with and it was a little difficult. So in the second iteration really went out the window. But all those things are very important to continually think about, because you don't want to continue to marginalize any population when you're making headway with another.
I think this is a space where Caleb's ideology around 3D scanning could also be really effective, right? Like creating a 3D scan box for students who have visual impairments so they can actually feel what the artifacts would feel like. What's a miniature model of the Parthenon look like? And be able to use their hands to see. In 10 years from now, when we have haptic gloves, be able to actually put your hand up against, the polygonal wall, right? And so the technology is getting us towards being able to create more inclusive spaces. But this was something that was a little bit of a roadblock at the beginning, was like, how do we make this accessible for all students? And I don't know that it is going to be perfectly accessible for all students, but even if you were a visually impaired student going to the Parthenon, they wouldn't let you walk up and put your hand on it, right? So how can we utilize this technology to also allow for greater interaction in a way that's not actually going to damage any artifacts?
That's an awesome idea. Yeah, let's use our 3D printing farm over in the library and out some stuff and send it to folks. That's
Exactly.
a great idea.
Yeah. Well, this is all very cool, and I'm very excited to see how this turns out. I hope you will all, keep in touch with us and let us over at UCAT know what's going on and how we can support you. And if you need to fill up those sites with some more people, so it looks like there's a lot more tourists there. I think we'll gladly accommodate that.
It's very generous of you.
Yeah.
We'll have to do a follow-up episode once the thing's live and we got some feedback from students and stuff. We'll have to do this.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Adam,
definitely.
your point's actually funny though, because in a lot of the videos, it's a bit of a "Where's Waldo?" as in "Where's Aviva?" Because Rob is talking to the camera and I'm either hiding behind a tree or a stone that was put there 1,000 years ago. Sometimes I'm just like floating in the background. So if you have a chance to watch the videos, you can play the game.
You got built-in extra credit there for the students too. They can find Aviva in all the videos. Awesome. Well, yeah, we will definitely, once you've kind of fully launched and got some more student data and things, we'd love to do a follow-up episode for sure. But thank you all for joining us. I think this is a really cool idea, and I can't wait to see it all come to fruition. Especially that 3D AI avatar that's I know is coming, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, hey,
well, thanks for the invite. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, we need to know your YouTube channel.
Yeah, I'll send you guys an email and we can put it up with the podcast.
Awesome.
Cool. Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you all again. And thank you to those listening for joining us on this episode of the Futures in Digital Learning podcast. Come check us out next month. Thank you.
The Futures of Digital Learning podcast is a production of the University of Arizona University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas you'd like to share with our office, go to the Contact Us link on our website, ucatt.arizona.edu.